The train rattled along the tracks, its rhythmic clatter a familiar soundtrack to Leela's daily commute. She sat by the window, her reflection flickering against the glass as the city blurred past tall buildings giving way to sprawling suburbs. Her worn paperback rested on her lap, but she wasn't reading. Her mind wandered, tangled in the usual mess of worries: rent due next week, her sister's cryptic text about needing to talk, and the quiet ache of another day spent blending into the background. At 28, Leela felt like she'd been running in place forever, a same job, same routine, same fleeting hope that something, anything, would shift. The carriage was crowded, the air thick with a hum of conversations and the occasional cough. Leela glanced up from her book as the train lurched to a stop at Grand Central. Doors hissed open, and a wave of passengers spilled in. Among them, a man caught her eye, and not because he was striking, though he was, with sharp cheekbones and dark hair swept back, but because of the small boy clinging to his hand. The boy, maybe 5 or 6, had wide brown eyes and a backpack that looked too big for his frame. He was tugging at the man's sleeve, pointing at something outside the window, his voice high and excited. The man smiled down at him, but his eyes were tired, shadowed, like he'd been carrying more than just a briefcase. Leela watched them for a moment, her gaze softening. The man scanned the carriage, clearly searching for a seat. The boy bounced on his toes, oblivious to the packed train, chattering about a dinosaur he'd seen in a book. Leela's eyes flicked to the empty seat beside her, then back to the pair. No one else seemed to notice Thema or care. The train was full of people lost in their phones, their books, their own worlds. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around her paperback. It was a small thing, offering her seat, but it felt like stepping into a spotlight she usually avoided. Still, the boy's bright voice tugged at something in her, a memory of her younger brother years ago, before life got complicated. She stood, smoothing her coat. "Excuse me," she said, her voice quieter than she meant. The man's head turned, his eyes meeting her serene, sharp, and a little startled. "Would you like my seat? For you and your son?" He blinked, like he wasn't used to kindness from strangers. "Oh, no, that's okay," he said, his voice low, polite. But the boy tugged his hand again, and Leela saw the man's shoulders sag slightly, betraying his exhaustion. "Please," she insisted, stepping into the aisle. "I'm getting off soon anyway." It was Aaliyah. Her stop was still 20 minutes away, but it felt like the right thing to say. The man hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you," he said, his tone warm but guarded. He guided the boy into the seat, helping him shrug off his backpack. The boy immediately pressed his face to the window, pointing at a passing billboard. "Dad, look, it's a rocket." Leela smiled, stepping back to grip the overhead rail. The man glanced at her, his expression unreadable but softer now. "You didn't have to do that," he said, standing close enough that she caught the faint scent of his cologne, something crisp, expensive. "But I appreciate it." "No problem," Leela said, shrugging. Though her heart gave a little kick, she turned her attention to the window, pretending to study the scenery, but she felt his gaze linger for a moment before he turned to answer his son's endless questions. The train swayed, and Leela steadied herself, her mind replaying the interaction. It was nothing, she told herself, a small gesture. But there was something about the man, of the way he carried himself, confident yet weighed down, like he was balancing too many things at once. She stole a glance at him, noting the tailored coat, the polished shoes, the way his hand rested protectively on his son's shoulder. He didn't blend into the crowd like she did. He stood out, even if he didn't seem to want to. The boy's voice broke her thoughts. "Dad, can we get ice cream later, please?" His small hands were pressed against the glass now, smudging it. The man chuckled, a low, warm sound. "Maybe, buddy, if you eat your veggies tonight." The boy groaned dramatically, and Leela bit back a smile. She caught the man's eye again, and this time, he smiled, a real one, small but genuine. It made her stomach flip, and she quickly looked away, embarrassed. The train slowed for the next stop, and Leela adjusted her grip on the rail, her book tucked under her arm. She wasn't sure why she felt so aware of him. This stranger, maybe it was the boy, his unguarded joy reminding her of simpler times, or maybe it was the man's quiet intensity, The way he seemed to carry a world she couldn't guess at. Either way, she told herself to stop staring. He was just a guy on a train. She'd never see him again. But as the train pulled into her station, the man stood, helping his son gather his things. "Come on, Max," he said, hoisting the backpack onto his own shoulder. He glanced at Leela, and before she could step toward the door, he spoke. "Hey, thanks again." "Really?" Leela nodded, her cheeks warm. Anytime. She stepped off the train, the platform bustling with evening commuters. She didn't look back, didn't see the man watching her as the doors closed, his son tugging at his hand, asking why they weren't getting ice cream right now. Leela walked toward the exit, her mind already shifting back to her routine: a dinner to make, emails to answer, life to trudge through. She had no idea that the man, whose name she didn't even know, had just made a mental note of her face, her voice, the quiet kindness that had caught him off guard. 2 weeks later, Leela was late. Her alarm hadn't gone off, her coffee had spilled on her blouse, and now she was sprinting through the lobby of the sleek downtown building where she worked as a junior copywriter for a marketing firm. The elevator was about to close when she squeezed through, muttering an apology to the suited man already inside. She barely registered him, too busy checking her phone for the time. She had a pitch meeting in 10 minutes, and her boss, Claire, was not the forgiving type. "Rough morning?" a voice asked, low and amused. Leela glanced up, startled, and froze. It was him, the man from the train. Same sharp cheekbones, same green eyes, though now he was in a crisp suit, no trace of the tired dad from before. He looked at a broken bar different, more in his element, like the world bent to him here. She blinked, her brain scrambling to catch up. Yeah, she managed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You could say that." He smiled, that same small, genuine one from the train. "I know the feeling. You work here?" She nodded, still thrown. "Yeah, copywriting." "You?" "Something like that," he said, vague, his eyes flickering with something she couldn't place. The elevator dinged, and he gestured for her to step out first. "After you." She mumbled a thanks, her heart doing that annoying flip again. As she hurried to her desk, she couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been studying her, like he was piecing something together. She pushed it aside, focusing on the pitch meeting. She had no time for daydreams about strange strangers, no matter how good they looked in a suit. The meeting was a blur of jargon and Claire's sharp critiques, but Leela held her own, presenting her campaign idea for a tech startup's new app. She was mid-sentence when the door opened, and the room went quiet. Leela turned, and there he was again, striding in with an air of quiet authority. Claire practically leapt to her feet. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice suddenly syrupy. "We weren't expecting you." Leela's stomach dropped. "Mr. Carter?" As in Ethan Carter, the CEO of Carter Innovations, the tech giant their firm had been courting for months. "The man from the train?" "Just observing," he said, his voice calm but commanding. His eyes swept the room, landing on Leela for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "Carry on." Leela's face burned as she stumbled through the rest of her presentation, hyper-aware of his presence. He didn't speak again, but she felt his gaze, steady and unreadable. When the meeting ended, Claire was all smiles, ushering him out with promises of updated proposals. Leela sank into her chair, her mind reeling. The single dad from the train was Ethan Carter, billionaire CEO, widower, and, according to the office gossip she'd overheard, one of the most eligible men in the city. She tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting. How had she not recognized him? Why had he looked at her like that? She shook her head, telling herself it was nothing. He probably didn't even remember her. Just a random act of kindness on a crowded train, that was all. But later that day, as she was packing up to leave, her desk phone rang. She frowned, picking it up. "Leela Harper," she said, cautious. "Ms. Harper," a smooth voice said, and her heart stopped. "This is Ethan Carter. I'd like to discuss your campaign idea. Can you meet me tomorrow morning?" "My office." She gripped the phone, her mouth dry. Sure. Of course." "Great. 9 sharp." "And Leela?" He paused, his voice softening just enough to make her breath catch. "Thanks again for the seat." The line went dead, and Leela stared at the receiver, her pulse racing. She had no idea what she just stepped into, but one thing was clear: Ethan Carter hadn't left her life. Not yet. Leila barely slept that night, her mind a whirlwind of questions and half-formed scenarios. What did Ethan Carter want with her? Was this really about her campaign idea? Or was there something else? She replayed their brief interactions at the train, the elevator, the meeting, searching for clues in his words, his glances. By the time she arrived at Carter Innovations' gleaming headquarters, her nerves were frayed, but she'd managed to pull herself together, dressed in her best blazer and a confidence she didn't quite feel. Ethan's office was on the top floor, all glass and steel, with a view of the city that made Leila's modest apartment feel like a shoebox. He stood when she entered, his suit impeccable, his smile disarming. "Leila," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Thanks for coming." She sat, clutching her notebook like a lifeline. "Of course, Mr. Carter." "Ethan," he corrected, leaning back in his chair. "Mr. Carter makes me feel like my father." She nodded, unsure how to navigate this. He was different here, more relaxed, but still intense, like he could see through her. "So, about the Campagna Broken Bar," she started, but he waved a hand. "We'll get to that. First, I want to know something." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "Why'd you give up your seat that day?" Leila blinked, caught off guard. "Yeah, Broken Bar, it was nothing." "You looked like you needed it more." He studied her, his expression unreadable. "Most people don't notice, or they don't care." She shrugged, uncomfortable under his gaze. "It was just a seat." "It wasn't," he said, his voice low. "Not to me." The air shifted, and Leila's heart pounded. She didn't know what to say, so she stayed silent, waiting. He stood, walking to the window, his back to her. "Max hasn't stopped talking about the nice lady on the train," he said, a hint of a smile in his voice. "He thinks you're a superhero." Leila laughed, the tension breaking. "I'm definitely not that." Ethan turned, his eyes warm. "I disagree." He paused, then added, "I looked into your work after the meeting. Your Campagna, it's bold, smart. I want you to lead it." Her jaw dropped. "Lead it? I'm just a junior copywriter." "Not after this," he said, like it was already decided. "You've got something, Leila. I saw it on the train, and I saw it in that meeting. You don't just blend in." She stared at him, her mind racing. This was too much, too fast. But there was something in his voice, his certainty, that made her want to believe him. "Okay," she said finally. "I'm in." "Good," he said, his smile widening. "And one more thing. Max insists you come to his birthday party next week. He's turning 6, and he's very particular about his guests." Leila laughed, her nerves easing. "I'll think about it." "Do that," Ethan said, his eyes holding hers a moment too long. "I'll see you tomorrow, Leila." As she left his office, her head spinning, Leila realized her life had just taken a turn she never could have predicted, and somehow, she knew Ethan Carter and his suit were far from done with her.
Leila stood outside the Carter Innovations building, the invitation to Max's birthday party tucked into her bag like a secret she wasn't sure she should keep. The morning meeting with Ethan had left her rattled, and not just because of the promotion he'd casually handed her, but because of the way he looked at her, like she was more than just a stranger who'd given up a seat. She spent the rest of the week buried in work, diving into the campaign for Carter Innovations' new app, her mind a tug-of-war between excitement and disbelief. Every time she passed a colleague whispering about the CEO's new project, her stomach twisted. She wasn't used to being noticed, let alone by someone like Ethan Carter. By the time Saturday rolled around, Leila was staring at her closet, second-guessing her decision to attend Max's party. She'd settled on a simple navy dress, nice enough for a kid's birthday, but not so fancy it screamed she was trying too hard. The address Ethan had given her was a townhouse in a part of the city where she'd never set foot, all tree-lined streets and brownstones that looked like they belonged in a movie. She clutched a small gift bag, a dinosaur puzzle she'd picked out for Max, hoping it wasn't too Lamia, and rang the bell, her heart thudding louder than the chime. The door swung open, and there was Max, his face lighting up like she was Santa Claus. "You're here," he shouted, grabbing her hand and pulling her inside before she could say hello. The house was warm, filled with the chaos of kids running around, balloons bobbing against the ceiling, and the smell of pizza and cake. Ethan appeared from the kitchen, a dish towel slung over his shoulder, looking less like a CEO and more like a dad trying to keep up. His smile was easy, but there was that intensity again, his green eyes locking onto her like she was the only person in the room. "Leela," he said, wiping his hands on the towel. "Glad you made it." "Thanks for inviting me," she said, holding up the gift bag. "For Max." Max snatched it with a gleeful cool and tore into the wrapping, his excitement over the puzzle making Leela relax a little. Ethan watched, his expression softening. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly, stepping closer as Max ran off to show his friends. "But it means a lot. He hasn't stopped talking about you since the train." Leela laughed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "He's a great kid." "He is," Ethan said, his voice low, like he was sharing something private. "And he's picky about people." "You made an impression." She felt her cheeks warm, unsure how to respond. The room was loud, kids shrieking over a game of tag, but standing there with Ethan, it was like the noise faded. He gestured toward the kitchen. "Want a drink? I've got wine, soda, or some questionable juice boxes." "Wine sounds good," she said, following him. The kitchen was a mess of pizza boxes and half-eaten cupcakes, but Ethan moved through it with ease, pouring her a glass of red with a practiced hand. They stood by the counter, the party buzzing around them, and for the first time, Leela felt like she wasn't just a guest. Ethan asked about her work, her ideas for the campaign, and Lysaida really listened, not like her boss Claire, who always seemed to be waiting for her turn to talk. He laughed at her dry humor, shared stories about Max's obsession with dinosaurs, and when he mentioned losing his wife 3 years ago, his voice caught just enough to make Leela's heart ache. "I'm sorry," she said softly, not sure what else to say. He nodded, his eyes distant for a moment. "It's been hard, especially for Max, but we're figuring it out." Before she could respond, Max barreled into the kitchen, demanding Ethan's help with the pie +/- ata. Leela volunteered to assist, and soon she was holding the rope while Ethan blindfolded Max, the kids cheering as candy rained down. The rest of the party passed in a blur of laughter, cake, and Max insisting Leela join him for a round of dinosaur trivia he'd made up on the spot. By the time she left, her face hurt from smiling, and Ethan's quiet "see you Monday" felt like a promise. Work became a whirlwind after that. Leading the campaign meant long hours, late-night brainstorming sessions, and meetings with Ethan that left Leela both energized and unnerved. He was brilliant, his mind sharp and decisive, but he never made her feel small. Even when she fumbled through presentations or second-guessed her ideas, he'd lean back in his chair, ask questions that pushed her to think bigger, and occasionally flash that smile that made her forget what she was saying. She told herself it was professional admiration, nothing more. He was her boss, technically, and a single dad with a life she couldn't begin to understand. But every time he lingered after a meeting, asking about her day or mentioning something Max had said about her, the lines blurred a little more. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Ethan found her in the office kitchen, staring at a coffee machine that had just eaten her last dollar. "Rough day?" he asked, leaning against the counter. She groaned, pushing her glasses up her nose. "This machine hates me, and I still have a dozen emails to answer." He chuckled, pulling a coffee pod from a stash she hadn't noticed. "Here, my secret supply." He popped it into the machine, his arm brushing hers as he reached past. "You're doing great. You know, the campaign's coming together because of you." She took the coffee, her fingers tingling where they'd grazed his. "Thanks. I just don't want to mess this up." "You won't," he said, his voice certain. "You're too stubborn to fail." She laughed, surprised, and for a moment, they just stood there, the hum of the office fading away. His eyes held hers, and she saw something shift, as something that wasn't just gratitude or professional respect. But before she could process it, her phone buzzed, breaking the moment. It was her sister, needing help with something urgent, as always. Leela sighed, stepping back. "I should go." Ethan nodded, but as she turned to leave, he said, "Leela, wait, can I take you to dinner?" To say thanks for everything, her heart skipped, but she hesitated. "You don't have to do that." "I want to," he said, his voice steady. Friday night. Max is with his grandparents. What do you say? She swallowed, her mind screaming caution, but her mouth said, okay. Friday. Friday came too fast. Leela spent an hour agonizing over what to wear, settling on a green dress that made her feel brave. Ethan picked her up in a car that probably cost more than her apartment, but he was still the guy from the train, a warm, a little guarded, and quick to make her laugh. Dinner was at a quiet restaurant with candlelight and wine that tasted like it belonged in a museum. They talked about everything at her childhood in a noisy, chaotic house, his years building Carter innovations from nothing, Max's latest obsession with space. He told her about his wife, how her loss had left him adrift, and how Max kept him grounded. Leela shared her fear of always being invisible, of never quite measuring up. It was easy, too easy, to open up to him. When he walked her to her door, the air was cool, the city humming around them. I had a good time, he said, his voice low, his eyes searching hers. Me too, she said, her heart pounding. She wanted to say more, to ask what this was, but he stepped closer, and her words caught in her throat. Leela, he said, his hand brushing her arm. I don't know what I'm doing here, but I know I don't want to stop seeing you. She froze, her mind racing. This was Ethan Carter, a CEO, single dad, a man whose life was galaxies away from hers. But the way he looked at her, like she was the only thing that mattered, made her want to take the risk. I don't either, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. He smiled, and before she could overthink it, he leaned in, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was soft, tentative, but electric. When he pulled back, her head was spinning, and his smile was brighter than she'd ever seen it. Good night, Leela, he said, stepping back. See you Monday. She watched him go, her fingers touching her lips, her heart telling her this was just the beginning. The weeks that followed were a blur of work and stolen moments. Leela threw herself into the campaign, which was gaining traction, her ideas earning praise from the team and even Claire, who seemed begrudgingly impressed. But it was the moments with Ethan that lit up her days, the coffee breaks where he'd tease her about her terrible taste in office snacks, late-night texts about Max's latest antics, dinners that stretched into hours of talking and laughing. Max became a fixture in her life too, dragging her into his world of dinosaurs and rocket ships, his small hand slipping into hers like it was the most natural thing. But doubts crept in. Leela saw the articles on Linnea Ethan Carter, tech titan, linked to models and heiresses, not junior copywriters who took the train. She overheard whispers at work, colleagues speculating about why the CEO was so interested in her project. And her sister, ever the skeptic, warned her to be careful, to not get hurt. Leela tried to brush it off, but the fear lingered. Was she just a fleeting distraction for a man like Ethan? One night, after a long day, they were at his house, Max asleep upstairs, the two of them on the couch with the movie neither was watching. Ethan's arm was around her, her head against his chest, but her mind was elsewhere. What's wrong? He asked, sensing her quiet. She hesitated, then sat up, meeting his eyes. He's a broken bars. It's amazing, but it's fast, and I keep wondering if I'm just a broken bar. I don't know. A phase. You're you, and I'm just a stop, he said, his voice firm but gentle. He took her hands, his thumbs brushing her knuckles. Leela, you're not a phase. You're the first person in years who's made me feel like I can breathe again. You're real, and you're good for Max, and you're good for me. I'm not going anywhere. Her eyes stung, and she looked away, but he tilted her chin back, his gaze steady. I mean it. I'm all in. Are you? She swallowed, her heart pounding, but the warmth in his eyes, the certainty in his voice, melted her doubts. Yeah, she said, a smile breaking through. I'm in. He kissed her then, deeper this time, and as she sank into it, Leela knew that whatever came next, the work, whispers, the weight of their different worlds, so they'd face it together. The train ride, the seat, the small act of kindness, had changed everything. And Ethan Carter, the single dad CEO, was now a part of her life, for good.